Hi, we have Kathleen Anderson here, who grew up in Carver. She grew up in the Tower House there, which is right off of Route 58. But it's the one right next to the Savory House that, what's his name, built?
William Savory.
William Savory, yes.
George Bowers' first wife was Waitstill Savory.
How are you related to them again?
Well, after Waitstill Savory Bowers died, George Peter Bowers married my great aunt, my grandfather's sister. And she was Eliza Ann Shaw until she became Eliza Bowers.
Yep.
And my grandfather was Samuel Shaw. And she was the older sister, he was the younger brother.
Okay.
And so that's how it eventually came to the Shaws. After Mr. Bowers died, his widow continued living there, and she was a Shaw without children. And
really?
Yes, she had no children. And so my father had been in the Forest Service in Montana, but she wrote, and I guess he was a favorite nephew, and very reliable, and she asked him to come back and take over the property, the cranberry bogs and the house, and take care of her.
Nice, good.
So he
smart woman.
Hated to leave the Forest Service, but he felt he should. And that's how I came east in a clothes basket in the back seat of one of those old Dodge touring cars with isinglass windows, you know.
What was it like growing up in the Tower House?
Well, you know, it was a very large house, and it was a beautiful old home. But when we were very small children, there were 3 flights of stairs going to the 2nd floor. At the back of the house, there were 2 rooms which had been servants' quarters, and they had their own stairway to go down into the laundry and thence to the kitchen to work. And there was a bathroom down at the back of the house, which I presume was theirs. And then there was another flight of stairs that went from our dining room up to the 2nd floor. And those were the stairs that we used when we were small. And then the front stairs had a curved banister, and they curved up to the 2nd floor, and it was carpeted, and those were the stairs we weren't permitted to use when we were little.
Your mother didn't want to get it dirty.
Well, they might we might have worn out the carpet.
Right. Yeah.
So we used the 2 back stairs, the one out of the dining room or the one out of the laundry.
Yeah.
So I felt very grown up when I could use the front stairs.
You said the walls were 12 feet high?
Yes. Well, the ceiling was 12 feet above the floor.
Yes, yeah. And you also...
Terribly expensive to eat, I might add.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And you said the kitchen wall was rounded?
The wall between the dining room and the kitchen was a rounded wall. And I don't know why, but that's the way it was.
Nice. And the Tower House itself, is that a room that you can go into?
Yes, that was my museum.
It's a finished room, or is it just?
Well, I mean, it's painted.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's not rough. And that was my museum, because I was always interested in natural history. So I used robin's nest, an interesting rock, shells from the beach when we went to the ocean. Anything of great value I put up in my museum.
Nice. What else was up there? It was small, right?
Well, it is very small. It might be, what is this, 4? No, this is probably 6 feet. Maybe. You think of a 6-foot person stretch out here, I think it's probably 6 feet square, maybe 8 feet square. I mean, I had a little table up there, and I had a chair.
So it was like a playroom for you when you were a child?
Oh, I beg your pardon. It was a museum.
Oh, okay. What was your favorite memory growing up in the house?
Oh, it's full of memories, full of memories. I suppose when we would all be gathered in the dining room for a big meal, we ate in the kitchen, you know, breakfast and lunch, and many times supper as well. But when we had guests and my uncles came, my father's two brothers came off, and they lived in the east. And then occasionally we'd have guests from Montana, and that was always exciting. But one of my strongest memories was of my grandmother Shaw visiting us and being late coming down to breakfast. And my dad was a Victorian, and he was a wonderful father, but he was very strict as far as children were concerned.
I'm sorry, what was his name?
Ernest Wakefield Shaw.
Okay, yep.
My grandmother was Harriet Wakefield until she married Samuel Shaw. At any rate, we were never permitted to shout at Mother or Daddy. We wouldn't dare. Well, Grandmother was late coming down to breakfast one morning, and we were already all at the dining room table. And she came in, and Daddy said, "Good morning, Mother." I was appalled. How dare he? No one had ever told me that Grandmother was deaf.
Now, George P. Barrows, he was your...
Bowers.
Bowers, sorry.
It was the Barrowses that lived across the street.
You're right, there is Barrows, sorry
Barrows,
about that.
that's right.
Barrows, he was your
He would be my great uncle.
Your great uncle, okay.
But he had died before we came east, so I never knew him.
Right.
But I knew there was a wonderful photograph in the parlor, a lovely photograph of my great aunt Eliza, and a photograph of George Bowers with his white beard, looking very distinguished, very grown up, very old. I do know that this half of Sampson's Pond was dredged.
Right.
It was probably very swampy when the houses were built.
Yep.
But it was dredged, and it was dredged for iron.
Yes, yep. Yeah, he owned a Hollowware, an iron company, didn't he? A Hollowware that made kettles and pots and stuff like that?
Well, the foundry over in South Carver.
Charlotte Foundry?
Yes, Charlotte Furnace. It made ammunition, not ammunition, but hardware. Made hardware for the Revolution, I believe.
And he was also responsible for the first real bog.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he invented the cranberry industry, in the sense.
Right.
Cranberries grew wild. They still grow. I've seen a few wild bogs where they still grow wild. But people would go to the bogs, the wild bogs, to pick cranberries. They were generally small, swampy, seepy places. And he was the first one to realize that, you know, you could make a big one. There's enough low land around here so that you could make a big one and transplant those vines, and then you could harvest a crop.
Nice, yep.
He was obviously an entrepreneur. He could see, people used to say about my husband that he could see around corners. Well, George Bowers could see around corners, see the things that could be coming in the future.
Really? I wish I had that.
It's still needed.
Yeah. No, but I think one of the companies made the iron gates that are around the Boston Public Library.
Yeah. That was the Murdoch Parlor Grate Company that my grandfather Shaw was the head of at one time.
Yeah.
And Murdoch is another old carver name. I remember when a very elderly Mr. Murdoch used to come to call on my great aunt Eliza.
Really?
And she was white-haired and he was white-haired, and they would sit in the living room, you know, talking about the old days. Well, my grandfather Shaw ran the Murdoch Parlor Grate Company.
Okay,
But it had been established by Murdoch for one, but he may have been Murdoch's partner.
Okay, so what is your first memory of this church?
Well, coming here, we always came to the Sunday services. They were always at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And at 2 o'clock, the bell tolled to alert everybody in the neighborhood that it was only 2 hours until church time. As far as we were concerned, it was time to get out of the lake, because we spent every warm day on the beach or in the water. And so when that bell tolled at 2 o'clock, we knew it was time to get out, go to the house, begin to get dressed up to go to church.
Nice.
Because we always came to church. And then at 4 o'clock it tolled again, and that's when the service began.
Have you ever rang the bell?
No, but my brother as soon as he was big enough and heavy enough, it was his job.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
It's not that easy.
I've rung it myself, and it's not that easy.
No, I think my father was usually the one that did it. I mean, he was a strong man. He lived across the street, and he had a lot to do with keeping up the church. And he hired the man that did the work at the cemetery, and he often worked there himself.
George P. Bauer. Yeah, he also served on the trustees of the church.
I'm sure he did.
And you were telling them the story about why they built the church. You told me that earlier. Could you tell me one more time?
Oh, yes. When these summer people, and they all had quite a bit of money, and when they established this colony here, and then there were the old John Savory house, the Barrows house up on the hill. The house I knew was Ike Shaw's house, but it had, and then the Cornish house, the bigger white house, belonged to a man named Cornish. They felt they had to go to church on Sunday, but if they were Methodist, whatever it was, they involved hitching up the horses, getting into a carriage, and then it would take the horses quite a while to get to South Carver to the Methodist church, Center Carver to the Baptist church. If you were a Congregationalist, you had to go all the way to North Carver to that church. And the Catholic Church, I don't believe there are any Catholics around here, but if they were, they had to go to North Carver. They decided that they wanted a church of their own, which would be convenient. And it was really built for convenience. But they couldn't decide what denomination the church would be, because there were no two congregational families, no two Episcopal families. They were all different. And so it had to be non-denominational, Protestant, but non-denominational.
It is a beautiful church. And you said you remember coming here, and they used to have a curtain across the side,
yes.
And there used to be a singer.
Yes, there would always be a soloist. My father usually got the ministers, and I don't know how he found out about who the distinguished speakers were, but we had some absolutely wonderful, wonderful ministers. It would be a different one each Sunday, and usually the church was open for the 4 Sundays of August. But, and I don't know how he found out about them, but the one I remember, because he had a sense of humor, was William L. Stidger, was one of the speakers, and I believe he was at Boston University, head of the Divinity School. And then there was Dean High Moore was my favorite, and Dean Moore came from Pittsburgh. He was the one that had the sense of humor. But you see, they were all summering on Cape Cod, most of them.
Right.
How my father found out about them, I don't know. But he
would get them to come.
He would get them to come. And many of them came because they liked the idea of this little non-denominational church, and it's a pretty little church, and they were paid $100.
I think they had somebody come from Harvard too.
Yes, there was somebody from the school, the Divinity School at Harvard.
Yeah.
They were fine speakers, wonderful speakers. And then there was usually a soloist who sang and sat hidden behind the curtain until she stood up to sing.
I think that's funny that they had a curtain over it. I just can't.
Well, it would be distracting for the singer and for the minister if she was, if she wanted to blow her nose. Everybody in church would turn and look at her.
That's true.
Much better to be behind the curtain,
right,
and then be able to stand up and sing.
It's a small church.
It's a small church.
You can see really good.
Yes. No, you wouldn't want to sit there while everybody looked at you instead of the minister. Right. So it's much better stand up from behind the curtain, do your singing, and then disappear again. I think of a stage when I think of that. I don't know why. But you have memories of you and your sister coming here and your hair still being wet when you came in? Oh, yes. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Because we spent all our time at the lake. And the Miss Anna and Miss Ethel, as we call the Savory sisters. And you knew them, right? Oh, of course. All our lives. What were they like? Lovely people, but very prim and proper. And when they arrived from New York, we would see the car go in. We'd know that they were coming because they had a maid, and she came from South Carver, And well, they over the years had several, but the house would be, there'd be a car coming in, you know, and the house would be aired, and the beds would be made up, and all the things you do after the house was put away by having white sheets over all the furniture, so nothing faded.
Yeah.
And so the white sheets would come off the furniture, and the windows would be opened, and the refrigerator would be stocked, and you know, the cars would be coming and going, the lawn would be properly mowed. And so we knew that Miss Anna and Miss Ethel were about to arrive. I think probably an active social life in New York City. But we didn't know what they did the rest of the year. All we knew was that during the time they were here, in fact, at one time I would have known the addresses, but because we sent them Christmas cards and wrote them little letters. They came early enough, so they delivered May baskets to us.
Nice.
And that was always exciting.
Yes.
Because we didn't have a lot of candy. We could go over there and have maple walnut or chocolate or some other exotic flavor.
And where was the general store?
It was the post office, and it was right at South Carver. And so the last postmaster, the last owner of the store, was Connie's father. And her name was Constance Jenny. So it was Jenny's. We'd go over to Jenny's.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then before that, it was Ernest Lewis that owned the store, and I guess you'd go over to Lewis's, or you'd go to the post office. One of the things I remember are the men that used to be sitting outside. There was a porch, and the men would come at mail time. They knew when the mail would be out. They'd come a little early, and there'd be a bunch of older men sitting on the porch with their, you know, with their legs down on the ground. The porch was maybe this high above the ground, or maybe a little higher. They'd be sitting there talking, and it was their chance to visit. Well, how's your cranberry crop? You know, have you got a fruit worm problem this summer? And they'd be exchanging cranberry news.
Nice.
And so sometimes I'd go with my father, and if the mail wasn't out yet, we'd stay in the car, and then he would go and sit and get the cranberry news from all the other cranberry growers sitting on the porch waiting for the mail.
Do you remember picking cranberries?
Of course, because when a bog is first planted, it isn't a mat of vines the way you see a bog now. Each little plant is planted separately, and it has to get rooted and really established. And if you started scooping the first year or two, there wouldn't be much of a crop, but you'd also rip up all those little vines. And so for the first 3 years, I think it is, the berries were hand-picked.
Yep.
And who hand-picks them? You get women or your children to do it.
Yep.
And so Mother and Barbara and I would be hand-pickers.
Yep.
Jack was, from the time he was very young, he was doing heavier work than that. And, you know, working in the screen house and handling boxes. When we sold the big house, I think the whole property might have been about 20 acres maybe. And when we sold the big house, we sold the pasture on the Savory House side, and we sold, I think most of the apple orchard went with the house. And the apple orchard hasn't been tended. Sadly, it was a wonderful orchard. My grandfather Shaw planted it. We had all these different varieties of apples. Some were the ones for pie, some were the ones for sauce. Macintoshes were the ones to eat.
Yes.
And we sold apples, which brought in income.
Really?
Well, and we had bees, and we sold the honey. And so we had a tennis court, and we had the lake. He built us a raft, a big raft that would have been maybe 20 feet square or something like that. It was much bigger than this pew is wide.
Got to have a raft if you have a pond, right?
That's right. It had a springboard at one end and a tower at the other end.
Nice.
And between having our own private beach and having a raft and having a rowboat and having a sailboat and having a tennis court, some kids called it the Country Club of Carver. And you know, we had lots of friends because they all wanted to come.
That Sampson's Pond is not that deep, is it? It's probably only about 12 feet deep.
Oh, there's places where it's very deep.
Really?
Yes, where it was dug out here. Yes, oh yeah, it's, I think, 18 feet deep in places. Well, it was dredged out.
Right, yes, for the iron ore.
For the iron ore.
Yep. And did you ever see any evidence of it being dredged, or?
Well, there's a lot of iron in the area, and I don't think I ever saw any real evidence of it. I remember Jack, my brother, telling me one day when he was out on the lake, and the water was very flat, calm, and very still and very clear, and he looked down and saw the trunk of a huge old pine tree on the bottom of this part of the pond, and that would have been there since the time the trees were cut off and the lake was dammed up and dredged.
What is your favorite memory of growing up in Carver, period? Like, you know?
Well, the most exciting thing is Old Home Day.
Is Old Home Day?
Yes, do you know what that is? You don't live here.
Oh yes, I do. I live in Carver. Isn't that where they make the clam bake and stuff?
That's
like
right.
That?
There's
yes.
a clam bake, and they sell balloons, and we each came home with a balloon, and we went to the clam bake, and we saw all our friends there, and well, it was the biggest thing that ever happens in Carver. I don't know about now, but at that time, it was the biggest thing in Carver. Everybody was there. And so,
nice.
Living where we did, there were no other children within walking distance.
Right.
And Daddy wasn't about to have his girls walking to Center Carver or walking to South Carver. Who knows what might happen if they were walking on the streets.
Right.
So, from the time school was out, we never saw any of the kids that we knew when we were small until the next September.
Right.
Except at Old Home Day. And everybody was there.
So you get to see all your friends.
We got to see all our friends.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was a big deal. We got balloons and the clam bake.
Yeah.
The whole thing was, we wanted to be there from the minute it opened until, there was a band concert and there were singers. And,
nice.
You know, and they'd have a pony that people could have pony rides. And for, I don't know, $1 a piece maybe, or something, quite a bit of money, but you know, when we were little, we had pony rides. I mean, what kid would want to be anyplace else on that day?
Right, I know, yep. Were you ever at the granite quarry? They used to have a granite quarry, or was that before you?
Oh, I don't know anything about it. This is news to me. Where was it?
Supposedly it was near the Murdoch Hill. I guess that was before you. The kids used to play.
Well, what I thought of as the Cornish house was originally the Murdoch house. And I know that there's a granite wall on the Savory property where from the lawn it drops right down to the water, and the soil is held up by granite. But I didn't know it came from around here. I didn't know there was a granite quarry here.
Yes, yep, a long time ago.
And was it up on the hill then?
Yeah, near Murdoch Hill. That's what I read anyway.
I wonder where to have a quarry you have to dig it out.
Right.
And where was that, I wonder?
All I know is that it was near Murdoch Hill, and they used to use oxen
yes,
to drag it out. And
somewhere up there must be a place where they found the granite and quarried it.
Oh yes.
And I never heard this before.
Really?
Is it in Henry Griffith's history?
Yes.
Well, Murdoch lived in the Cornish house, the big white house at the top of the hill.
Where's
right
that?
Soon after you come out of the avenue, or on Route 58, right up at the top of the hill.
Oh, Savory Avenue?
Yes.
Oh, it's on the left?
It's on the, yes.
Well, if you're going that way, it's on the left.
Well, if you were going that way now, it would be on the right.
Oh, there's a big white hill house?
There's a big white, long, narrow white house. And right beyond what was Ike Shaw's house. And it's on the right, and then there's a little old Cape Cod house, and then you go into Savory's Avenue or bypass it.
Yes, yep.
So when you go back, look for the big, long white house.
Okay, yeah.
And that's the Murdoch house.
All right.
So maybe the quarry was, but well, I never explored the woods.
Tell me where you used to go out in the woods behind the cemetery here, yeah?
Yes, and then walk over to Edaville.
Oh, Edaville, yep.
And walk over to where the dikes are and the cranberry bogs. There wasn't any Edaville, as you know Edaville.
It wasn't around when you were walking around?
I say Edaville. We just went over to Ellis Atwood's bogs.
Ellis Atwas Bogs.
Yes.
Yep. And what did you do over there?
Just look around, hope nobody saw us, and slip back again.
Right.
And then the Saveries, I think, Miss Anna and Miss Ethel always had sort of an eye on us.
Oh yeah, they were always out there too.
Well, they weren't out there, but sometimes quite often they'd sit under the trees and lawn chairs.
Nice. All right, well, I just wanted to thank you, Mrs. Kathleen Anderson, for coming here today and doing this interview. I appreciate it.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's brought back some memories.